Crimson 606. So, thank you for watching my video. Also, catch me on social media platforms. And if you want to see some great art, hit my DeviantArt page up. And finally, support my Patreon. Thanks. Alright guys, alright, it is me, Crimson 60620, and let me just make sure that my camera is a little bit better. Alright, so, ta-da, green screen, hey! And quite frankly guys, just got home from work about 10 minutes ago, had to fix my food, hop in the shower, wash off work and shit, you know, the normal. And I thank everybody who's tuning in. Speaking of thanks, I'm trying a new time, 7. I'm trying to hold myself to that standard at least Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and weekends, whatever fucking time I feel like it. So, I just want to say, first, as with always, I do want to say thank you for tuning in. And let's get down to what we actually were doing yesterday. We're actually covering Mark Blyth. Yay, he's made a return to our video stream. Yay, woohoo. And he's one of my favorite economics professors besides Professor Wolf. So let's go ahead and get this going. Yeah, before we go ahead and get this going, I want to actually have a little bit of monologue. So let's actually start this. First of all, I know I didn't mention it yesterday because I wanted to get the totality of what happened on both Saturday and Sunday morning. It's despicable that we have these people that, quite frankly, have a tragedy in their life and want to fucking visit that tragedy on other people. And you know what? Bo of the Fifth Column, his video that he did about it was fucking awesome. And quite frankly, it is more of an issue. I'm a fucking liberal. I'm going to be honest with you. I feel we should get rid of the guns. I know that's not a fucking practical situation, but I feel we need to get rid of the guns. And not only that, I feel that we need to get rid of the reasons why we need to have a gun. Most of the NRA stock is going up like fucking crazy because of this shit. Because people are fucking fearful. I saw somebody I know actually says, where are the good guys with the guns while these people are shooting? And it kind of touched me the wrong way, because that whole good guy with a gun was always used as a way of saying that only a certain type of people, quote unquote, should have guns. Certain good guys. When reality is, this motherfucker that shot people in Ohio, he was taken down within a minute, and he visited all of this fucking destruction on so many fucking people inside of a minute's time. Now, don't get me wrong, we definitely should have stricter gun control, but we should also have fucking stricter society controls. What I mean by that, quite literally, we need to have it where mental health issues are not stigmatized. We need to have issues where people don't have a need to actually feel so fearful that they need a gun to protect themselves. This is the shit that we fucking need. And god damn it, man. Fucking god damn it. When people feel that they have no choice but to go out in a blaze of glory, when people feel like that there's no hope, so might as well make it count while it lasts, that shit is not okay. That shit's definitely not okay. Now, ironically, more people can be in that situation where they feel like it's nothing left to gain, so I'm gonna go out in a blaze of glory. But it just so happens that the people that have the most access are the ones you're seeing that have, well, that have perpetrated all of this shit. It's fucking not okay. I'm tired of this fucking atmosphere of fear. And a guy in El Paso, he quite literally said he wanted to go kill brown people. Because of fucking fear. How fucking dare you, man? Like, seriously. And he walks out. And he gets arrested. Because he thinks he's being some kind of fucking hero. I'm done with it. I'm sick and tired of this shit. If you think you need a gun to protect yourself and protect what's yours, you're part of the problem. Because a lot of these motherfuckers, they're not buying the guns illegally. A lot of these motherfuckers, they're actually getting it from family members. And I may get to this video later, but there's a certain sense of craze in this fucking country. And we need to do some shit about it. Because, quite literally, it's going to be more of a problem. And with us demonizing a certain class of people or not supporting everybody, yeah, of course, far be it from me to say, like, there are a group of people that have some fucking privilege. There is a group of people that has a lot of fucking privilege. But we need to take care of every fucking body. Every fucking body. And kind of watch how we tell those people that have privilege that feel that they're losing it. I keep saying it and I keep saying it. I keep saying it. I think there are very few people that are truly racist. I will admit that. But I think it's a lot of fucking people scared. A lot of people feel that they're losing their place. And when you take something where people feel that they lost their place, a perceived place of where they fucking thought they had it, and you're gonna have issues. But let's not forget the people who never felt like they had their place as well. Do we need to start being our brother's keeper? Maybe. We see to stop us from getting shot from just going out the fucking house. So, ironically, let's talk about this whole economic thing. Here we go. Mark Blyth, yeah, ladies and gentlemen. Mark Blyth.
To move the needle on this is I need the United States to flip to left populist, and I need China to continue to be China. And Europe's already doing this. And if you add those three spaces together, that's 80% of global consumption. That's what you need, just three. I don't need the agreement of 1,000 German print.
All right, so we're picking up a little bit. I had to go back a little bit, but we're picking up with how populism is something here to stay. The extremes are fucking here to stay. But which way are we going to go? Now, he has made the point that it flips from right populism to left populism, back and forth. There's no real in between. His joke, if, Bill Gates walked into a bar, because he's a billionaire, that doesn't mean everybody is a millionaire by averages. People live in the extremes. And climate change, I shit you not, is going to motherfucking push everybody to a different understanding of how the fuck we should take care of this fucking planet. And it's gonna be hard. It's gonna hit us hard. Like I said with the Horizon Zero Dawn video game, if you haven't played that game, it will have you shooketh of how climate change can actually affect a lot of fucking things. But let's continue.
Princess. So in a way, this upside to this is actually kind of good. Global governance is not better for climate change because it encourages free riding. Everybody waits for everybody else to do it. National experiments are interesting. I like the way that China does a lot of its public policy making. So the idea is they're this terrible totalitarian state with brainwashing and control and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, they also have the highest rate of fiscal decentralization in the world. So around 80 cents on every dollar spent locally. Now you have to remember, when you're talking about spending locally in China, you're talking about spending in something the size of Copenhagen. But that's local expenditure. But nonetheless, what the government does is if they have, let's say, a project, we want to do something about rural poverty, they'll basically send instructions out. Basically, that's what we want to do. We'll give you some cash, figure it out. So you've got 120 different districts. And some of them will steal the money, and some of them will lie, and some of them will fail. But 4 of them will actually come up with something that looks pretty interesting. And they'll go, what did you do? And then they'll send teams around and they'll figure it out, and they'll go, right, everybody who's like them do this. And that's when the authority comes in, and that's when you get massive changes. Industrial upgrading in China, the whole China 2020, this comes from basically the analysis of what were called the second tier industrial areas that didn't have the first big wave of foreign investment. So they weren't stuck at the bottom of the supply chain with the big FDI moves. They had to basically work with them on a completely different cooperative basis, which meant technology transfer was in at the beginning. That's where Huawei came from. Huawei was a family firm, right, that didn't even do electrical, they did electrical switches rather than telecoms. And they were right at the bottom of the value chain, but they learned. And then the government basically said to them, what are you doing? How are you getting good at this? And then that gets generalized.
All right, so Huawei, if you don't know, about 2 months ago, Huawei was a big telecommunications firm in China, and Google had used it to make phones. Now, because of the tariffs and to make an example out of the company, Trump forced a lot of people to forced a lot of companies to just stop doing business with him. So that's why you had the whole Huawei. It's actually spelled with an H, but it sounds like it starts with a W. But yeah, they became so big because from what Mr. Blyth said, Professor Blyth said, they effectively did good enough for the government to say, hey, what are you doing? And invested into them. But let's continue.
So a world of nations may be nationalist, but it also allows different experiments, and it also allows different experiments in scaling, which is actually very important. And finally, climate adaptation and market economics over the long run. Here's the bad news for everybody on the sort of the libertarian side. Markets cannot internalize their externalities on a planetary scale. They just can't. It's impossible. So we've built a world in which, a way to think about it is we've managed to build a system that's as powerful as a nuclear reactor, but has the same problem as a nuclear reactor. That you cannot internalize the externalities once it goes bang. You simply can't. So we will have markets, but they will be, for lots of reasons, much more national, much more managed, and much more state-led. So it's not back to the Bretton Woods system of the Golden Age. It's going to be something completely different. But it's going to smell a lot more like that than what we've been used to in the recent past.
So this is a wonderful analogy because the economies that a lot of people build blow the fuck up. But ironically, yeah, we're actually going to see more markets where it's just going to have to be more managed. And yeah, I know libertarians are going to be upset that, oh, capital should just run free. But every time capital runs free, it fucks shit up. That's why capital should never run free, because they're going to be thinking about profits over people. But let's fucking continue.
So there you go. That's everything.
All right, we're gonna let him do Q&As because he always has some interesting questions, and because I can't be there because one, economics would make my motherfucking head hurt with studying the formulas, not the ideas but the formulas. Let's listen to the Q&A.
Find out spelling your name, though. Q. Start with one. Thank you very much. I have two questions. The first one is, which role commodities are playing in this whole structural setting? Because you have something like gold. But in U.S. currency that have become commodities in their own right.
Absolutely.
And metallurgists closed a few days ago. A Swedish company that was literally destroying Amazon because they were purchasing liquid gold from Peru and Brazil. So this has spiked the price of gold in 6 days.
Right.
And so that might have a problem for us to consider how we're going to deal with commodities at that level. The second one is, when you talk about markets cannot internalize externalities at global scale, I get that, but for example, the Chinese market, it's outsourcing their externalities. Like they are outsourcing their labor to the African continent,
Right.
where they are just building infrastructure that doesn't solve anybody, and they're just killing the Nigerians, the Italians, etc. So is that the price, the kind of externality that we just have to accept as the price for a reset of the software?
So to take the second one, I mean, we just simply don't have another planet to ship our shit to. Right, it's as simple as that. So you think of plastic pollution. We're just becoming aware of what 8.3 billion tons of plastic looks like, and it is literally everywhere. Now we don't really know if it's deadly yet, but I don't know. The idea of breathing in microplastic 24/7, I'm not so sure it's a good idea. Maybe that's just me, right? So the point is, it's created these externalities that you simply can't internalize, right? The commodities one is very interesting. Commodities have always been a problem for commodity exporters, right? So the BRICS was based on a commodity exporter's fantasy, right? So Brazil, put China out of this, right? And India was never part of it. What you were really talking about is Russia, who did oil, and Brazil, who did soybeans, right? And a few other things. So basically, the problem is you get super cycles. Because demand's going up, you invest in more production. The production gets cheaper, so there's more demand. But eventually, you get to a point where you've got too much supply, and it just goes bang. So the first order is it's really bad to be a commodity producer, right? Unless your commodity is the US dollar. Because if you're the global safe asset, everybody has to hold dollars. 60% of all commodities are priced in dollars. If you want to basically get imports, you can't use your own currency for 60% of shit. You need to earn some dollars first. Which means the United States is a printing press which allows it to behave phenomenally badly and still prosper. Right? So we could literally, forget Trump, we could have Lucifer run in the United States for 4 years. And it wouldn't really matter because there's somebody else on the other end of the trade who still has to buy dollars. So we get to massively misbehave because of this. So yeah, if you think in commodity terms, it certainly gives you leverage, but the problems are very different depending on what the commodity is.
All right, so that's actually very interesting. For a while, and I will say this, in the Quantum of Silence made a joke about it, people were trying to actually use the euro as a global currency. But in the end, is still stuck with the dollar. Quite literally, the dollar is the American current. It is the global currency. Now you can actually say that, like he said, that the U.S. basically can do what it wants because not only is not because of the might of the U.S. military, yay, but quite simply, literally because we're the world's banker. We're the world's currency exchange. Now, let that just sit and sink in with you. That people quite literally are screwing over the rest of the world because you can. That shit don't sit well with me. That shit is not cool. But people do it. That's fucked up. Well, let's continue.
We're going to speak about political system. After the adjustments, a while in the adjustments are made, what it ought to look like to make the adjustment possible.
Mm-hmm.
That's a nice thing to say about China, which is
Not exactly, not a democracy.
seemingly interested in coming. And I was struck by your suggesting that the central government simply is able to use the nation's regions as laboratories, see what works, find out what works, and impose that generally. I mean, it struck me that the United States, for a long time, considered itself to be a similar kind of family of
50 different experiments.
one of the rationales for federalism.
Yeah.
States' rights, if you like. That, well, why impose a uniform set of solutions in a diverse country? Let's let the states experiment.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's safe to say that federalism and the United States political system more generally is on the point of failure for a number of reasons, a number of very scary reasons,
Mm-hmm.
and suggesting that we might as well have Satan running the country.
A little bit of hyperbole on that one, but you get the point.
Satan was always portrayed as a very suave and very intelligent person who didn't have to try.
Right.
The beauty of the sort of golden or relatively nice
Mm-hmm.
by the 70s.
Yeah, at least labour friendly. That's all it is. It's labour friendly.
A period in which, well, that of course is the Cold War, but there was, as it were, a global ideological struggle that turned on the theme: which system is more genuinely democratic?
Mm-hmm.
The free West with their parliamentary democracies, or with some sort of central command
Yeah.
socialism, more truly democratic and only made to look dictatorial by some unfortunate remarks of
Right.
and now our party systems are broken, and those of the countries that were selling themselves as parliamentary democracies.
Thank you, Adrian Paula.
What's
Thank you.
the future politically in terms of political party systems, representative governments
Mm-hmm.
in the non-Chinese
Yeah.
parts of the world? North America, you think that is a
Yeah.
good.
So there's a lot in all that. I mean, so I sound like a fan of China.
All right, so what he was saying, and this is my condensed version of understanding the question. He was saying which was better, the Soviet Union situation or America. He was praising China's whole idea of different laboratories of states and how the U.S. used to be like that, and we moved away from it. Well, quite literally, we moved away from it because of our political vote getting party, or the way we get political votes, where you had to have a united front of states of standards where politicians put party over, their own representative district. And yeah, some of it is the quote unquote getting pork out of politics, where that was a two-edged sword. You had the whole, you know, getting federal funding for your project because that way you get your votes. But with money being in politics so much, you had to toe the party line because the party gets you the most money. But let's continue.
China. I'm a fan of China in the sense of what they've done in terms of the reduction of global poverty simply by doing what they did is truly remarkable. I need them to give us as many scientists and engineers and steal as many patents as they can so that they can go to scale on renewables as fast as possible. The rest of it I'm no fan of, but that's who they are. So let's just deal with who they are. Now, because our party systems have collapsed, does that mean that basically we have to go that way? Absolutely not. The material condition is different. I also think that the institutions are actually incredibly robust. So even with what will happen through Brexit, my guess is that basically Boris will go hard Brexit, the Tory party will split, which will be a bit of a shame for British politics and continuity. We'll have a Boris party, which is like an AFD type party that is an actual, hard right racist immigrant party. They'll probably never get more than, when things settle down, 10 to 12% of the vote. There'll be a rump Tory party which will probably split and join with the Liberals, which will then incentivise half the Labour Party to do the same thing. And we will reform under those same institutions. Macron will fail. French politics will invent new parties. I mean, these are deep institutions. Rule of law, rule of contract is incredibly important. The most salutary lesson on China was in 2015, Xi opened up capital controls because the central bank and a few other people around the Politburo wanted to see if they could really internationalize the renminbi, they could really make it into a global alternative. Well, the problem with that is you have to basically open up, and when you open up, nearly 1 trillion in domestic assets left the country, which basically says your entire investor class, given 2 minutes of a chance, would rather live in Vancouver than anywhere in China, as you know already, because they've all got bolt holes, right? So when that's your political economy, it's incredibly fragile, and it can only be run in a command and control manner. We don't have those problems. We've got problems, but they're not those problems. So I think those institutions survive, and what you end up with is a more volatile politics that reflects the moment and begins once again to reflect the actual concerns that people have, regardless of how they're expressed and whether those things offend us or not.
So his answer here was pretty quick, where yes, he may be a fan of some things that China does, but in the end, capitalists aren't staying in China. But let's continue.
So, right, but I wonder, so everything that you use, on that, but I live in a state that's been on fire and the ability to cope with disasters that are right in a variety of ways, playing numbers. Okay, so the politics of the drought in the conservative parts of the valley, so that this was something invented and created by the government strictly. Water and interfering with water infrastructure and doing all this environmental things.
Right.
So this is so the farmers are hardest by the drought. Like all of the trees, they're having to essentially decimate
Right.
source of income. And their rationale, which they used for like was that what we did. So there's a I guess I wonder about the relationship between, you kind of have this imagery of kind of climate change is obvious, we're all dying, there's a reaction to that, there's a clear perception of what the problem is, right? And
Mhm.
not many people just talk to it. But aren't other
Yeah.
interpretations?
People can, yeah. Yeah, but I mean, at the same time, I mean, even Peter Thiel has to escape to New Zealand, and New Zealand is not immune. I mean, there is no.
So the question, from what I hear and what I understand, is that the young lady lives in California, and it's just been a lot of things happening in California, and the blame goes in a lot of different ways. And what do they do? Because capitalists are, people don't want to invest because they feel it's the government's fault that the problem is the way it is. And let's listen to this answer.
Nowhere for them to go. Money is not an exit option. And if you look at the US data, it's got the highest degree of climate change skepticism. But if you really drill down and you look at the surveys amongst climate change skeptics, most people have a sort of, we know it's happening, but I'm not convinced it's man-made, which is a bit to say, I know I trashed a house last night in that crazy party, but I don't really want to take responsibility for it, right? The hardcore deniers are, it's a bought and paid for network. And one of the interesting, it's probably about 15% of the population, that's the highest in the OECD. So it means the vast majority of people actually do kind of get it, which is good. We spoke about this before. I mean, the Exxon new lawsuit is California and New York and DC, the 3 district circuits that matter, making federal suits for disclosure against Exxon for climate change denial. I think that you probably need a critical event. For me, it's Miami losing drinking water, right? But if you also have the oil companies coming out in a multi-billion-dollar settlement for climate change denial, which will happen, part of which is a public mea culpa that basically says, yeah, all the stuff from the Heartland Institute and it's really sunspots and all that, we just paid for that. It's just like big tobacco. It's all horseshit, right? Then at that point in time, if we have citizens, our democratic peers, who still refuse to believe anything, then we're doomed. That's it. I mean, that's entirely possible, right? But I don't believe people are systematically stupid because there's nowhere else to go. It's the great leveler. There's nowhere else to go. What are you going to do? Even if you don't believe it, the incentives all point in one way. Right? I hope so too.
Yeah, I have a friend who
Yes, bitch, die.
and your global inequality graph. So it's like, yeah, it's a shame we're debts of despair and the Rust Belt, but hey, look at the Vietnamese middle class.
Yeah, right. And nobody cares about the Vietnamese middle class.
No, it's an economic way of thinking. Just see a giant sea of well-being and see the whole aggregate grow, while paying no attention at all to internal distribution.
Totally.
So when you do pay attention to the fact the world is divided into sovereign nation states, and you start segmenting this, then there's the slightly troubling problem that capitalism is losing its legitimacy within individual states. So if you think there's some kind of benign global process going on,
all right, is he healed back?
The occasional.
Yeah. Compensate the losers. Yeah. Compensate the losers.
But look at how things still growing. Right? Look at China.
Right.
That's not how it works.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So
totally.
Huge distribution is in key nation states.
Yeah.
Then people are simply going to be given up on capital, and they're going to turn off on this engine, switch off the engine of growth.
Right.
This is just not going to happen.
Yeah.
So I'm a statist, not a nationalist.
Yeah, and I would agree with you. I'm saying I'm on the same page.
Right. So, with my happy head on, I'd say, look, the money we spent bailing out banks was produced how? Well, some of the Fed went. So that money could be spent on infrastructure.
Totally.
Spent on measures to address climate change. America's crumbling infrastructure, public hospitals, universities. How are we going to...
All right, so he's actually going really long, and I don't want to dissuade what he's saying. He's actually saying something that's pretty fucking awesome, because basically what he's saying is like a lot of these people that are complaining about the deficit now weren't complaining about what was going on with the deficit when, you know, it was bailing out the banks. I see all truth detected. But let's continue.
The paper. The global hegemon cannot go bankrupt.
Absolutely.
The currency that it prints.
Absolutely.
So we've discovered you can spend whatever the hell.
And there's no inflation constraint.
And there's no inflation constraint.
Yep.
So, the old story was, well, we just chucked a load of
Yeah.
debt into the market that was going to be inflation. And we know there wasn't.
There wasn't, absolutely.
So we pumping this stuff in.
Mhm.
Still inflation will happen.
Right.
There's no sign that it's going to happen.
Absolutely.
So with, capital's had its day. I say 85% of the US economy is services.
Mm-hmm.
Labour's coming back. There is a genuine political concern that there needs to be a budget system, we've said.
Yeah.
And austerity. There's a huge political prize for someone to say austerity's over. I'm just going to printing dollars and so on. That's what I thought Trump was going to do.
Right.
I thought he was going to turn into a Keynesian.
Right.
I suddenly realised he could unlimitedly print dollars and fund an infrastructure project that would bring,
Right.
public works, unemployment to go with the happy shareholders. I thought this guy's in for.
Yeah.
No, he didn't. But the prize is there.
No, absolutely. Bizarre.
A generation of millennial socialists to.
Right. Well, the only person that might come close to this, and you can't really, this is MMT, modern monetary theory, you can't really do this in Britain because the inflation constraint is there because they have the pound rather than the dollar. So a devaluation, you import 2/3 of your food, you have a problem, right? But at the same time, Boris could basically, to win the election, go, right, I'm giving everybody a 20% tax cut. Which is...
Pretty much what he just said.
Right, exactly, right. But he can pay for it basically by running an enormous deficit because gilts won't move. They simply won't move. And because of that, he can do this. So in a sense, it's bizarre that the right has more ability to run a kind of MMT type economy than the left does. And the left spends its whole time talking about it, whereas the right just does it. And they do it all the time.
Well, that's something.
Yeah. It was what's his name? Vice Cheney. Yeah, it was Cheney. Yeah.
I need her fully healed.
And particularly if you're the global hegemon. I mean, there's an exploitative constraint, though, in the United States doing exactly this, which is the following. If you were any other sovereign and you did this, it would be reflected in your exchange rate and it would be reflected in the value of your debt. Because there's no global reserve asset, you're essentially saying to the foreign holders of dollars, suck it up. But it's legitimate in the following sense. You could switch into any other asset and it wouldn't make any difference. Their yields aren't going to go anywhere anyway. So you'd have to really, really screw the Fed and the Treasury in order to move the US dollar and US dollar assets down enough that, let's say, German assets spike. But if they did, there aren't enough of them to buy and they're already yielding negative, so why would you bother?
So what he's saying is that the U.S. pretty much has a stranglehold on what they want to do with the world. And it is not something we should take lightly, but we have a stranglehold of what we can do with the world. So, yeah, let's continue.
So, it is absolutely true. China does MMT behind capital controls. The US kind of does it and could do a lot more because it's a hegemonic currency. That's it.
Yeah. Very interesting.
Yeah. My teenage novella.
I mean, these were things that I've last several years putting it together. I was wondering whether you could expand on thoughts where seem to be fairly optimistic that political institutions, at least, more robust.
Mm-hmm.
Be fairly optimistic that whatever changes will go smoothly.
Mm-hmm.
I was just wondering, yes.
Why? Basically, why?
So, is it not a concern? I mean, I think it is perhaps not a concern for is that there's this growing, not growing, but several countries that were at this
Come on, dude. Come on.
Are now switching over towards what is being termed the liberal democracies.
Yeah, Hungary, exactly, yeah.
These other countries, which admittedly are kind of on the periphery of these and more robust democratic states, but nevertheless, is that not a word, especially when you do have massive electoral victories on the part of partisan.
Yeah. So I'll give you an example. I'm sitting at a conference and someone's talking about doing interviews in Turkey. And whenever they do, they say, please turn off the camera or turn off the recorder. I'm happy to talk to you, but I can't put this on the record. And I say, why not? Because if I tell you what I really think, I might lose my job. Now, I don't want to sound hysterical, but there are certain things that you can say in American universities that will cost you your job.
Wow, that's interesting. Where you get this whole idea that a lot of people aren't just like, I think another thing like that kind of gets me with like some of the things that we see nowadays is just people actually being so caught up in like not saying the wrong things, not because they are scared of certain things, but because the powerful and the system of the powerful actually just don't want certain things said. That's a fucking problem. But let's continue.
Is it really that different? Second one, let's see, the robustness of the institutions. Let's accept the fact that the United States in particular is not a democracy, it is a plutocracy. It is run by dark money, and it is run by people who have incredible access to computational power and have used that to pervert the course of democracy over at least 2 to 3 electoral cycles. In 2006, I think it was, Citibank did a report called Plutonomy, which they were roundly criticised for, which if you go back and read is wonderfully accurate, which they then followed up with another one, I think in 2009, where they went, this is wonderfully accurate. So the thing about money people is they can't afford to tell themselves too many lies because they'll lose money. So those tend to be the best faith estimates. That's why I read the Financial Times. You can't lie to the global money classes consistently and expect to survive if they're reading your paper. If you're reading, if you're selling the Sun or whatever, it's an entirely different prospect. Now, why is it I think that institutions are robust? What is it that China cannot supply when it comes to a global currency? It's not just the capital flight of its own citizens. It's the fact that it has no rule of law. It has no independent judiciary. It has no court system. And that stuff takes hundreds of years to evolve, and it's based upon precedent, and the build-up of jurisprudential knowledge, and deep-seated norms in society. And you can't invent that shit overnight. Part of the Eastern European problem is you can write all that down in paper, you can import all the EU law you want, but it's really not part of who you are. So you're much, much more prone to capture. So yeah, exactly. Serbia is the most wonderful example of this, right, from Milosevic onwards, absolutely, when Tito collapsed. But I mean, the contemporary examples, even inside the EU, I mean, places like Latvia, I mean, these are just giant tax dodges for the Swedes to launder money. I mean, they're disgusting little regimes. Sorry, Latvia, but it's true. So, you know, you have these hugely problematic institutions that don't have the institutional depth. It takes a lot of work to blow those
I did
things
not
up.
realize these
In
things
part
actually,
because the global investor class likes having those things there, because that means they can get their money back. The problem with China is I can buy Chinese bonds. If I go to redeem them, I might disappear, right? Whatever happens in Britain, that's not on the cards. And that type of institutional depth, I think, is incredibly important. And the people who are bankrolling a lot of things on the right, like Brexit, like the AFD, they're actually hardcore neoliberals. And they like their money and they like their contracts. So it's in their own interest to maintain those institutions. They don't
now, I
mind
think
chucking
this drawl
bombs
is going
around
to be
and throwing meat
die,
to the
going to
base,
die,
when they start
but
to
you
lose
know.
money, shit gets serious.
So,
All right.
I guess I'm curious about the sort of causal story about the nexus between the hardware and the software, the solution. Right? Because one of the striking things about storytelling is that each computer is like pretty successful for an extended period of time before it crashes.
Bugs in the software, absolutely.
And each successive one is tuned precisely to account for the
Failures of the last one, absolutely.
standard in Brentwood.
Deflationary, and then you create an inflationary problem, so then that becomes the problem and you solve that with a slightly different deflationary regime, absolutely.
But it looks like the fourth computer is solving an entirely different problem.
It is.
Right?
You're right. You're right. Absolutely.
So yeah, the story was like a pretty strictly economic one for a while.
Yeah.
Oh, this shit stinks.
Or at least it was endogenous. What happened was a series of exogenous constraints came along and said, and now it doesn't really matter. So imagine we did a slightly different sequence just in terms of when climate change is operative, right? Let's say climate change happens in the 70s rather than now. So what you would do is you would be having exactly these types of scraps in what is essentially a deflationary, in a deflationary regime to come. And that would change the politics of how you would do this quite remarkably. So it's just the confluence of essentially when this exogenous force hits these endogenous waves and which one it intersects with. But I think that's exactly right. And in a way, if you talk about...
So one of the things that is actually quite remarkable about this is he's placing a lot of bets on climate change actually resetting the system that needed to be reset already. Like, after what happened after 2008, this shit needed to be reset. And we didn't. We kept it chugging along. But, shit, let's continue.
As a causal story, then there is a certain deus ex machina quality to the last part. But I say legitimately in the sense that, no, it really is a force from outside. It is enter stage left and change the drama. And that's what climate change is.
So I guess the question then is just whether or not it's going to require a much stronger computer, like a more widespread ideology of
That's the thing, I don't think it does. And that's why I kind of like, you know, I'm saying nation, but I'll go back to state, right? So my favourite societies are places like Ireland. And this is why, even though I'm not a nationalist, I'm quite okay with an independent Scotland. And Canada's kind of like, given the scale of it relative to population, a bit like this, right? So your provinces, for example, right? About 4 million. Because everybody knows who everybody else is in this strange way. And everyone knows who's an absolute bastard and who's not. And everyone knows who's corrupt even though they haven't gone to jail yet. And there's a certain amount of skin in the game and transparency that goes with like societies that are scalable to that size. And another thing I'm really hopeful about at this moment is the technologies that, I mean, you know, the notion that we're going to go by 2050 to zero carbon is impossible, right? So there's going to be a cost. We just don't know how much of a cost it's going to be, even with maximal effort. But at the same time, like solar and wind, increasingly the new models for wave harnessing, right? They're becoming way more efficient, right?
So this is one of the great points that he's making, that, okay, we have Capital who basically took, and this is another point that he's actually made before, Capital basically took the 5 things that the government, 4 out of the 5 things out of a smartphone was created by the government. And Capital has actually made it, you know, made it efficient enough that, well, people are using the smartphone. They made it smaller. They made it more efficiently workable. That's what capital did. Now, that's great. Let capital do the same thing with, the renewable energy. Just let us fucking make the money from it, or let us benefit from it, and not just capital. That's the thing. A lot of capital socializes the fucking. When you see a lot of things from businesses, they privatize the costs. They privatize the gains, but socialize the costs. And it's about time the capital stops doing that for their own benefit. But let's continue.
On a simple consumer basis, a friend of mine showed up with a Model 3 Tesla. Now, whatever you think of Elon Musk, right, he's basically created an entire sector. So I got on this thing and drove it, and I was like, what's the mileage on this one? She's like 350. That's more than my Volvo, right? And this thing's a fucking spaceship. And it goes, it's light speed. You take the restrictors off of that and hit it, it's like warp 5, Mr. LaForge, right? So, think of, the cost of a solar roof. It used to be 50,000, right? We're now heading down to 20,000. It will be 10,000. It'll be the same product market deflation we've got with computers. So then there's a question of, well, what's scalable and where? And if we're all sitting around doing an EU level agreement, right, it's never going to get anywhere. But if you have smaller societies, even sort of city sizes, right? Denmark's very good on climate change precisely because Copenhagen and a couple of other places are the country. So it's pretty easy to get shit done, right? That you bring these scalable technologies and you allow people, not as from big ideology, but just practically, look, we're all facing this crisis, right? Alan, you run this place, right? Just figure out how to do it. That's what I mean by the Chinese decentralization example, right? We all have the same available tech and financial resources. We're going to have to do transfers and burden sharing, certainly. Figure it out locally, and figure it out as locally as you possibly can. And a whole other part of the book that I'm doing, the R for Everyone, it's about going very micro and looking at basically literally community-based solutions and then enterprise-based solutions and then city-based solutions for increasing the stock of public assets. So the last thing I want to do is reinvent the 1970s state in that sort of nightmare version that people have of it. I think that the combination of sort of tech and sort of the way that politics are trending just allows more to happen at those lower levels, and then whatever works gets picked up because you're facing a crisis. So that makes me much happier about it. I think it's far less ideological than it seems.
We have 2 more people in the queue. I think we can turn it all in. Let's do IO.
Let's finish. Let them finish.
So the last part of what you talked about is integration. Not exactly what we're looking into is the software language and change and answering these questions. Just like related to that also, I guess would be in terms of just general legal justice, because I can see how it goes like it's going to be implemented. This is in the West, where you have there's like access to this.
Right.
So it's this stuff. I'm thinking of this is now in Africa, where there's this huge like technological gap from them to them.
Absolutely.
And how they would be able to review these missions. You also mentioned earlier about how in terms of collective efforts to sort of like come along and bring in this change, we're talking about how maybe we just like a leftward like shift in the US, and then China,
and then the European Union.
Yeah, to just
That's 80% of global consumption.
Yeah. My question was then how. Because I'm not really convinced by the idea of that radical leftist shift.
It doesn't have to be radical. I mean, it's already baked into the cake. I mean, what AOC calls the Green New Deal, the European Commission calls the stuff we have on the books. It's this is the representation of the fact rather than the fact itself. Sorry to sound like Mary Poovey, but that's pretty much what this is. It's not that. It's like Jeremy Corbyn's a radical. He wants to bring back British Rail. What the fuck is radical about that? I mean, right? It's the representation of this. I just want to be clear about that. That's it.
So, like, say that works. It still seems like there was like the deep ideological differences. The especially between China and the States.
Yeah.
And like China seems to be going on their own path with their own
Belt and Road, yeah.
initiative, right?
Yeah.
So, like, given plus like issues of like global justice, like periphery.
Right.
I'm sort of like on a pessimistic side. Maybe sort of collective effort to
Right.
this climate change, and you can address other issues of like global justice in policy.
So take the global justice one. The global justice issues, the climate change issues that matter globally for global justice issues are actually not carbon. It's really sea level rise and it's biodiversity collapse, right? And also commodification of biodiversity. That's the really big ones. But there's also an upside to this to a certain extent. So think about a country like Nigeria, right? So this is a very large economy in Africa. It's going to become like, you know, in terms of population, United States size soon. It's a very, very large place. And they didn't, you know, those countries have not done much on carbon because for a long time they weren't industrialized, right? They don't have to go through all that. It's a bit like the phone system, right? You don't have to build copper wire and then go, fuck it, we'll have mobiles. You just go straight to mobile, right?
Shit.
So as these
This
other
thing is not
countries
dying.
do all the stuff they can do, then there's the quote-unquote advantages of backwardness. I don't have to go through all that crap. I can just mimic that tech and take it. And if it's a planetary emergency, then you can bet you'll get it for free. Because I need you to do this, and it's not going to cost me anything because Alan's got a button that just does this, and we're fine, right? So I think that it's the other issues rather than carbon that really speak to this. I mean, if you're in the Seychelles, you've got a problem, right? You know, sea level rise, rise in salinity, the silting up of the Nile, what that means for crops, youth unemployment in developing countries. These are the issues, and they're not all linked to carbon in that way. So that's my thinking on that. What was your other one? Sorry.
Just because of the differences between the States and China, and China doing basically its own thing.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter because at the end of the day they still face the same constraints. So I mean, Belt and Road is really nothing more than. So the best way to think about Belt and Road is this: China exports stuff. Now, even though it's not as export dependent as it once was, its exports peaked as a ratio of GDP in 2008 and it's fallen by 10 percentage points. So people say it's not doing exports. And my point is yes, but over the past 10 years it's been growing at 7% a year. So the denominator's gotten so much bigger. So in terms of volume, even though it's 10% less, it actually exports more, right? So that's really, really important. What that means is it can't help but accumulate dollars. And what that means is licensing Trump to be bad to them. So they have a huge incentive to get off dollars. Now, how do you get off holding paper assets? You have to make real ones. Welcome to Belt and Road. So you're using the dollars to basically build the port in Djibouti, and whether it's a booby-trapped contract and you end up with a base or whatever, that's a different conversation, but they're building real assets, right? Now, anything at all that basically builds infrastructure which helps us deal with the larger issue, and China has the fact that their food supply is compromised, that their air is compromised, their water is compromised, regardless of what the relationship with the US is, they're going to do something about this. The big one's India. That's the big one. So the whole globalization
It's almost
story
dead,
of
thank
India
God.
is just
Shit.
basically horrible, right? So 80% of India still is on the $5 a day World Bank minimum threshold. All the globalization of Bangalore and the 200 million middle class hasn't touched them at all. The state of public services is appalling. Public health care is non-existent. Public health is non-existent. And their plan through Modi is to build something like 200 coal-burning power stations. So what they're doing is
my throttle is still kicking his
they're
ass.
basically going to use that as an extortion point to extract resources from everyone else. So that's the tricky one. But I see no reason why countries, even the scale of Nigeria, as far as Africa is concerned, don't just make the technological leaps and go straight to the good stuff. Particularly as because they're becoming wealthier societies and they're highly.
My throttle's still kicking his ass.
That are doing quite well is that they're really consumption based. They're kind of wage-led regimes. Right, and that's actually really good for growth because you get finally a more equalitarian form of growth there, which is interesting.
The throttle kicking his ass down there.
Quick, maybe in terms of a comment in terms of a point that I found very surprising, or the movement about this. So if I think about Brexit, Trump, or some of these nationalistic movements, the worry for me is that we're moving away from us possibly moving toward a collective system that might solve really big problems like climate change, or poverty, or equality, or the migration.
All right, we
crisis.
almost finished with his ass.
And so, where it becomes surprising, but really, your response is, well, we have these problems, and it's not really the way to think about it, is to go out. Is that right?
Yeah.
Um,
Basically, that going global to solve problems is a fallacy. It doesn't work.
What the problems are that you want to solve?
Fair. So give me an example that has been solved by basically going out.
I'm not saying that it has been solved by going out, but so the three would be something that I would think about off the top of my head would be climate change, poverty, like very severe poverty, and the global migrant crisis, or at least the European migrant crisis. And that might not be global, but at least it's beyond national.
Yeah. So the problems are, it's not clear whether the solutions are global. So let's take the migrants crisis, right? So you've got climate shock parts of Africa where 70% youth unemployment, where particularly young men are like, I'm out of here, we're done, and they just go, right? And then they're smuggling into Europe, etc. Then there's the Syria shock, the Afghan shock, and that whole area falling at the same time. So you end up with the crisis, as it were, coming through the Greek islands, all the rest of it. So how was that crisis solved? That crisis was solved not really through intergovernmental bargaining and burden sharing. The Europeans basically passed the buck to each other. There was a little bit of bribing Turkey to turn itself into a giant holding tank, which is now not really a global solution. The real global solution is the Greeks.
No, I'm not gonna die here.
And then allowing Salvini to be a complete bastard.
All right, I'm gone.
That's
I'm
actually
done,
what
guys.
happened in terms of
I'm
style
fucking done. I'm
stepping
pissed.
the flows.
I'm fucking
Because once
pissed.
it became
Why did I
clear
do
that
Assassin's
Italy
Creed?
would not accept those ships,
All right,
it stopped.
so
It didn't stop, but it went from basically 200,000.
we just doing questions and answers, guys. I'm gonna head off for the night. I'm kind of pissed that I just lost that shit. Oh my god. Probably you guys will see me tomorrow. I want to thank everybody who's watched. God damn it. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Enjoy, guys. Good night.
A month to about 2,000.